Okay, we shall resume from recessing in the meetings. Any disclosure of pecuniary interest this evening or this afternoon? Good. Okay, we'll presume and deal with the pedestrian crossing signal on Highway 93. CAO Schmidt, I'll let you lead off on it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So before we get into budget discussions this afternoon, as most of council is aware, we received a letter last week from the MTO confirming that the township's in a position to be able to move forward with a intersection pedestrian crossing signal at the Hillsdale location, or at the Highway 93 location in Hillsdale. So before you tonight or this afternoon, you have a staff report from staff requesting council's consideration to move forward with the procurement of services of a traffic engineer, as well as for a contractor for the actual construction of the installation of the crosswalk or the intersection pedestrian signal. So we've estimated at this stage to be approximately $225,000 for the design as well as the construction. And so staff's recommending or proposing that funds be drawn from the additional gas tax funds as well as the modernization funds in order to proceed with this project. So I'll leave it at that, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Open it up for questions, discussion. Councillor Cabral.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Comments first, if it's possible. I know that this was precipitated by some rather troublesome times and during council meetings with respect to that particular location. And I guess what I'm thinking in my mind is that we don't have any background. I think, and I do applaud Mayor Allen for taking it as a delegation to see if we could do something there. But I also know that if we rewind things, the reason we went that route was because of the difficulties we were having, or the difficulties that seemed to be being created back then, and we were looking at that time for hiring additional people to better monitor their crosswalk and that. And I guess what I want to know is, it doesn't seem to me that we've heard anything since the new individual took over last spring. And I guess my concern is what's in place right now is already paid for. When we move forward, we're doing it for the right reasons, because it appears to me that now, that particular situation, we don't have any information on whether there's difficulties there. Everything's running smooth. I drove by there yesterday, and the fellow was out there well before the kids came out to cross the street. And I also have to question myself when I think to myself, if I had children, which I did, and I had my choice between a crossing guard, a PXO crossover with a crossing guard, or a set of lights that may not have a crossing guard in conjunction with them. I'd always go, I think myself, for the crossing guard for the physical ability of being able to yell at the kids to get back out on the road, physical ability to be able to pull them back onto the road. These are things that signalized intersections cannot necessarily do. My other concern is that we're going to come up against the situation now where if we move to a signalized intersection, we're going to find ourselves in the position that we did in Elmvale, where they had a crossing guard there, and when the signalized intersection was put in, that crossing guard was gone. And I know that we're thinking maybe well, I guess other council members might like to speak on it, but at this present time, I'm not really prepared to move forward on it. I do applaud Mayor Allen for going and making the delegation for us to be able to do this, but I really want to make sure that the need still exists. And if it does exist with a set of lights, is the crossing guard going to remain there? Because that then puts us in a position where what do we do about these other locations where crossing guards were not kept? So those are my comments. I did have a question for CAO Schmidt, and my question was, I'm not really super familiar with what happened. I know our crossing guard in the village of Elmvale was gone once the lights were put in place. I'm just wondering what the process was at that time, and how how that was done. As soon as the lights were installed, did the crossing guard just stop attending there, or was there a phase-in period? And if there was a phase-in period, how long was that phase-in period before they terminated the crossing position?
Okay, thank you. So before I turn to CEO Schmidt, certainly there has been feedback from the community, from the public, and we use that feedback to form comments that were attached to the delegation, which was made to Minister Mulrooney. It is still a very, and comments included from the patrol guard, who said, described the danger involved with the present system, with the traffic, with the present pedestrian crossing, and the shortcomings of it. So there have been lots of letters, complaints, comments by the public that this doesn't work, and in fact it creates a false sense of security and increases the danger. And it was with that that Deputy Mayor Colgan, myself, and CEO Schmidt made the delegation to Minister Mulrooney and impressed upon her the imminent danger and incredible risk there is of personal injury and potential fatality of both a crossing guard and or somebody in the public. So there has been a lot of comment on Facebook by submissions by the residents, and finally the government is listening to us and allowing us to make this change, which I think after a transition period of having a crossing guard there to transition to proper usage of the new lights, should they go in, that it'll be a significant increase in the safety element. CEO Schmidt, did you want to add to that?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to, through you to Councillor Cabral. So I know we've had these conversations over the last week or so. Staff's still in a position where we're still trying to look at some of the historical nature of some of those existing crosswalks and or IPSs. So unfortunately, I don't have that information in front of me today to be able to comment on that. Myself, as well as our Director of Public Works and a couple other staff, actually none of us were here when any of those were put in place. So again, we're trying to resurrect some of that information to determine before we can officially comment on it. So my apologies, but I'm not in a position to be able to respond to that right now.
Did you have any comment with respect to a possible transition with the?
So through that, Mr. Mayor, I think I did. Councillor Ma Chapman did ask me through an email last night, which I responded to all members of council, about what would happen if this was to be approved tonight or this afternoon, whether or not we would be removing or suggesting to remove the crossing guard right away. I guess from a staff perspective, I would be somewhat cautious about that. Again, not understanding the full history of what I just mentioned to Councillor Cabral. But my concern would be is that, again, it's something that's going to be somewhat new in the community, and my preference would be is that the residents, the kids, the adults, the children walking across the street, as well as people actually driving up and down that road on a daily basis, should have some time to acclimatize themselves to this change. What that time frame is somewhat undetermined, because if council was to approve this, I don't know when this project would be completed. So suggest, if it was to be completed by May, that gives May and June for the community to acclimatize themselves. Is that enough time? I don't know. If it was completed and we stopped, we stopped the crosswalk or the crossing guard in September, is that enough time? I don't know. Again, there's lots of unknowns here where if council was to approve this, the timing of when it's done we may have to come back and have that conversation as to, do we get rid of the crossing guard, or when do we get rid of the crossing guard, or So those are my comments at this stage.
I'll go to Councillor Hanna and then I'll come back to you. I'll come back to you. Councillor Hanna?
Thank you, Mayor. I have to support Councillor Cabral because he's a former police officer and he knows traffic lights are not a panacea. We know it's a problem because look at all the cities that are asking for traffic light cameras because people don't stop at traffic lights. I think if the residents understood that crossing guard's not going to remain there once people even get used to having the traffic lights there, I'm not sure they would be in favor of the lights over the traffic or having a crossing guard. Personally, as a parent myself, I would have preferred to have had a person there to tell the kids not to cross, make sure the cars stop before you step out. A traffic light, we know everybody doesn't stop at traffic lights. If you drive very often anywhere around, you'll see you start through an intersection, somebody goes flying through. So I would suggest that if we're going to make a decision between one or the other, I would stay with the crossing guard versus investing $225,000 onto a provincial highway, something that the province should be paying for and not Springwater Township.
Deputy Mayor Coughlin? Councillor Cabral?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Just a couple of points. Some of the things that I'm hearing about, well, we can assess this afterwards, we can assess that afterwards. The problem I have with that is these are things that should be assessed before we move forward on deciding to pay for and budget for a set of traffic lights there. I think the people in the community should be given the opportunity. Here's 3 choices. And this is what we're proposing, and let them actually decide which one they would prefer to go to. And if it ends up being that what we're going to be providing them is a set of traffic lights without a crossing guard, similar to the situations we have in Barrie, Midhurst, or not Barrie, sorry, Elmville, Midhurst, Minising, then they might prefer to stay with the present model that they have. If they opt then to go for a set of traffic lights, the same as what the other locations presently have, and I might add that Barrie, with thousands and thousands and thousands of children walking back and forth to school every day on some 4-lane roadways, do not have an adult crossing guard at a single one of those locations. So that's something for us also to reflect on. I also question whether or not the location in Hillsdale is any more dangerous than the location in Minising or the location in Elmville. We have thousands and thousands upon thousands of vehicles traveling up Yonge Street. I would suspect probably on the same number as what travel through 93. So it's not that I'm against the set of lights. I think we need to put some things in position first before we decide to move forward for it, rather than go forward with the lights and then try and put these things in place afterwards. It's a lot more difficult to take something away once you've granted it than it is to give people an option, let them select what they want, and when that's what they've got, well, that's what they chose. And that's all I'm asking for. I just think this is premature because we got the decision that we need to move forward on it right tonight. There's no option in there for this to be moved over to the budget for consideration. The only option there is to either go for it or not go for it. So I would actually propose possibly a motion just to have this deferred so we can have that discussion and make sure that when we do this, it is the right thing to do. I'm all for children's safety, don't get me wrong. But I guess for me, I see the best solution at that location is the adult crossing guard that they presently have. The added benefit of having the PXO crossover there is certainly better. There are ways maybe we can enhance that for a lot less money than what we're going to be paying here. My fear is that if we move to a full set of traffic lights, we're going to find ourselves in a position where we'll be having to provide that exact same service to the other locations that are currently in existence if we keep the guards. For me, I'd like to get that stuff in there in place so that when we move forward, we know what we're going to be doing.
I just make it clear that the residents, through their Facebook page and through submissions and through the crossing guard, made it clear that having lights would be preferable to the situation that exists now, even without a crossing guard. The assumption is once the lights are there and they're used to it, there would not be a crossing guard. And this they have made very clear. Deputy Mayor Coughlin?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Further to that, I do agree that the community has spoken. My concern with going back to the residents and asking them to choose their level of service is that it's our responsibility to provide a standard level of service. And if we're going to offer a crossing guard with a full intersection or full set of lights, we're going to be required or requested to do that at many other crossings, whether it's in Elmville or Minising or anything. So I think that now that we have an opportunity to provide the residents with a solution that isn't subject to just when that crossing guard is there. So yes, there's a crossing guard during school hours, but there's no one there after school when they're going to the park or the ball, or for residents crossing back and forth outside those hours. So this solution is year-round, 24/7 to that of the pedestrians. And I do agree that there should be an interim solution, but I would not support having a crossing guard and this set of lights. I also agree with Councillor Hanna in that this should be something that the province is taking care of. Now that we do have them saying, yes, we've identified this as a potential safety hazard, we'll say that maybe the design they came up with for that crossing guard isn't the best solution. We still have the opportunity to delegate ministers this year through all of those. So we can come back to them and say, we're willing to pay for it. Thank you for the opportunity. We're looking for more help. And we can sit down with the ministers and say, this is what it's going to cost us. Can you come back to the plate now that you've identified it as a potential safety hazard? That option is still there for us. I think that there's been a lot of effort and work put into getting it to that next step. I would like to see this move forward. I don't want to have, like I said, the level of standard in Hillsdale where we have a crossing guard and a set of lights, because that's just going to create, as Midhurst is built out, as Minising moves forward, as Elmville's got 3 now asking for a 4th, we can't afford to have crossing guards at every single one of those intersections as well. So I think we do need to move forward with this intersection and transition the position of the crossing guard to no longer exist in Springwater.
CEO Schmidt, did you have a comment?
So, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you to Deputy Mayor and Councillor Cabral. Again, just to clarify, I wasn't suggesting that there would be a permanency, if you will, as it relates to the crossing guard. I think the idea is that there would be some kind of phase out or transition. So, but what that transition is, again, if this was to be approved and constructed and operational by May, then maybe the crossing guard is done at the end of the school year and we move on. But if it's not constructed until later in the year, then that's a conversation that council's going to have to figure out, I guess, as to where do you lie with this. So.
Before we get further on this, we need to get this on the table, so I need a mover and secretary to get on the table, please. Deputy Mayor Coghlan, Councillor Cabral. Before I go to Councillor Cabral, I also point out MPP Downey was instrumental in helping to push for this. As I say, we've had several delegations with respect to this, but one most recently with respect to the signalization. And I would say that if we don't act upon this, you know, our credibility in front of ministers might be impacted here. So, Councillor Cabral.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Just clarification, and certainly no reflection on Deputy Mayor Coghlan, but the PXO crossover that is there now is a 24-hour crossing control for anybody who crosses there. The additional part, or the additional piece, is the school crossing guard. I'd also like to mention that if the Ministry of Transportation had done the assessment there and that location actually warranted a set of traffic lights, they would have been likely in a position to put that in. But what they did instead was put in the PXO crossover. So I'd just like to suggest that maybe that's what was warranted at that location. And I also want to reiterate that I am not against the lights there. I just want to have a process in place where we can move forward with it and know exactly what we have before we go forward. And the residents also have their expectations met before we move forward. As far as credibility with the Ministry of Transportation, I'd have to say that sometimes things don't go the way everybody plans. We all know that. And as much as I'd like to save face with them, I'd rather say, listen, thanks very much for the option, but we're going to take a pass. We're not quite ready to move forward with it, but we will be in a year or two. I don't know. But those are my comments there. And like I said, I'm happy if it was just deferred a little while, but as it presently sits, I've got difficulty with it.
Councillor Moore.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. I just want to mention that we all have intersections that are hazardous, God knows. And so I would like to be privy to the Facebook groups and the messages that you are getting about the intersection in Hillsdale, because I haven't seen them. But I would like that information if I could have access to that, especially making decisions like this. And secondly, is there not an opportunity to approach the developers that are in that area right now to maybe pay for some of this for us? I know that we've got subdivisions and whatnot going in that area. We've asked developers to help us in other areas, so why wouldn't we approach some of them for some assistance?
CEO Schmidt?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So through you to Councillor Moore. So on the developer piece, if you will, so the intent is that we will be front-ending this, and then in turn, we'll be collecting, reimbursing ourselves through development charges as the development actually occurs. The development hasn't occurred yet, so we're essentially front-ending this piece, but the end result would be is that we would be collecting the DCs and then reimbursing ourselves for the 225 or whatever the number is that we end up spending on this.
Deputy Mayor Coughlin?
Thank you. On that point first, is it, when we do receive the reimbursement, is it to the full 90%?
I believe this is 100%. It's not a 90% factor. It's a transportation, fully growth. It's not a soft service like Parks and Rec type activity, which typically has the 10% statutory deduction.
Okay.
This is full 100%.
Perfect. And second to that, while I understand, and this through you, Mayor Allen, to Councillor Cabral, while I understand that the traffic control that's in place right now is 24 hours, the only reason we're having this discussion is it's failing the community. It's failing the community. So to me, if it was up and it worked, I mean, I drive that often, quite often, and the delegations that we've received from residents over time with, I mean, it's not safe. It is absolutely not safe. And I think that as far as having a crossing guard there, or having these lights in, now even more so understanding that this is basically a front end on our part, that it will be reimbursed. If we can create a situation to provide the safety as it's needed, I think that, to me, this is something that we should be moving forward with.
Councillor Chapman?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. I believe last year at the budget, when this came out, we had an issue with the hiring someone to be the crossing guard there. And that's when I brought up if we had to have one, and I was told through regulations that we did. I totally agree with the lights. If we can get back through DC funding, great. If we can go back to the higher ups and get it somewhat paid for instead of us, but if it's going to be paid for somewhere with the DC funding, then I'm for this, and I'm for the crossing guard to see it out till like July 1st when school's done, and that way there's a transition that everyone knows that it's not going to be a crossing guard anymore. I support this.
Councillor Cabral?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. I want to support this. Just as I said, I'm having difficulty with not knowing what the parameters are going to be. And with respect to Councillor Chapman, I'm kind of in the same boat. Maybe what we could do is, rather than spend a lot of coin on both, is if we could determine that this would be done at the end of the school year, it would give everybody there a chance to acclimatize over the summer. That might be a potential solution that would help me support it. But the other part that I see that is causing me some difficulty is, regardless of where down the road this funding's coming from, it's going out the door today. And when this funding leaves the table today, that means that there's a trickle-down effect to other things in the budget, that this money that we're taking, some where staff asks, some where council asks, that isn't going to be available. And I guess that's why I feel like I need just a little bit of breathing room. However, I do want to support it if that's the will of council. I'm not against it at all, but those, like I say, are a couple of concerns. I mean, if we could wait until the end of June, and that's when they built it over the course of the summertime, and it was ready to go at the end of June when summer holidays were around, I'm sure that would provide everybody in the neighborhood an opportunity to know how to use the lights and cross with them. But once again, I want to support it as much as everybody else does, but I just have those little caveats that I'd like to have rationalized beforehand.
Councillor Cabral, the money is not going out the door today. There would be an initial study and communication, but it would be contemplated to complete this work if it was approved sometime next spring, subject to getting the final sign-off of the design with the MOT. So as far as funding concerns, it's somewhat similar to County Road 10 West, and that the cash going out the door won't happen until next spring. So I'm just a little unclear, aside from the timing of the transition, or any transition of the crossing guard, what the parameters that you're confused about are. I've stated that the residents have made it quite clear of the dangers. The crossing guard has made it quite clear of the dangers. We have presented that to the minister, so I'm just not clear what parameters are still in question. CEO Brindley, or sorry, Schmidt?
Where is he?
It's okay, Councillor Coghlan did that to me about 23 times, so.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, I guess just to comment on that, again, the process would be is that if council was to approve this, staff would be moving forward with obviously securing the services of a traffic engineer. But before any construction would occur with respect to the crossing, we would have to come back to council for your approval, because likely it's going to be over the $50,000 mark, which is our procurement limit, whereby we have to come back for council's approval to spend those funds. So anything over $50,000, we have to come back. So we're essentially asking you here to allow us to proceed and hire a traffic engineer, but before we actually secure the services of a contractor, then we're gonna have to come back to council for final sign off on that.
And just in that process, I'd be glad to have staff share the comments that were made that form part of the delegation by both the crossing guard and the residents, just to see the problems that exist. Deputy Mayor Coghlan?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Why are we hiring a traffic engineer? Is there not enough up-to-date, is it like mandatory? To me, with the development that's happening there, or potentially happening there, isn't there enough studies that have been done? Like, we know this is a need. Is it like mandated through some minimum maintenance standard that we have to have an engineer? Like, to me, that's money I definitely do not want to spend.
CEO Schmidt?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's my understanding that through the letter that was received from the MTOs is that we have to build it to their standards, and hence, in order to do that, we don't have anybody on staff that is a traffic engineer. And so my understanding is we have to hire somebody to make sure that we're in compliance with that. Now, gladly, if our Director of Public Works has anything else further to add to that I'm missing, then.
Thank you, CEO Schmidt. Yeah, the traffic engineer wouldn't be hired to do the study, they'd be hired to do the design. So there'll be electrical design drawings that will be required. In all likelihood, the mast arms that hold up the current signs were not designed to hold up traffic signal heads, so they'll have to be removed and redesigned. There'll be pavement markings with relation to an IPS as opposed to a PXO. Then there'll be contract administration, inspection and whatnot. That would be part of that as opposed to studies.
Okay, follow on, and then one more comment, and then we'll vote.
Thank you. This is just another one. So the current crosswalk that's there, is that owned by the municipality with the intention that, let's say there was another location looking for something with less traffic that would suit that, would we be able to reinstall it somewhere, or is it just going to be scrapped?
CEO Schmidt?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to the Deputy Mayor. So our Director of Public Works has actually had a conversation with the project manager from MTO regarding this, and there was a question posed to them about, well, could we repurpose the current infrastructure that's there? We don't own it. MTO owns it. They won't give it to us.
Follow on.
And last comment, I think that even if not re-asking the ministers to somewhat fund this, if they have these traffic engineers in-house, which I'm assuming with all the projects they do, why can't they just send someone out to do that for us? Like, this to me is an additional cost that we shouldn't be bearing. That in itself seems like something that there could be an in-kind partnership designed with the ministry in order to make this happen at a lower cost to the residents.
Okay, Councillor Hanna.
Thank you. Through the chair to you, Mr. Schmidt. In the discussions we've had before with the development that's planned for that area, the main entrance into that development has changed over the years. So if this crossing with the traffic light is not where the main entrance is going to be, would we still be able to collect DCs for it? And is that something we should be considering before we either approve that development where the main entrance will be, or should we be considering that before we put the lights where they're currently going to be located?
CEO Schmidt?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Councillor Hannah. That's something that I definitely have to take a look at. I'm not sure that we're contemplating having this as well as additional traffic lights in the area. The idea was, I believe, is that originally the request was that this intersection be fully signalized. Obviously, the MTO has not agreed to that, so we are going to continue to push for full signalized intersection. But I think the idea was that this is a step up from what is currently there. Again, I'd have to look into that development a little bit further to fully answer your question. But my understanding is we weren't looking at putting two different signalized intersections in that same area, if you will. So
I'm not suggesting that. Just my question is, if this is not going to be the main entrance, if you like, into the new development, would we still be able to collect DCs for it?
Yes.
CEO Schmidt? Okay, okay, final comments, and then we're going to go to vote on this.
It's not a comment, Mayor Allen, thank you. It's a question directed to Director Coleman. And in respect of this, I don't know where this other entrance is going to be. I know we've discussed it, but I'm hoping that Director Coleman might be able to shed a bit of light, because I know that there is some distance requirements between traffic control installations, and I just want to ensure that we're aware of that. I mean, it just might mean that down the road, you might not be able to have a set of lights somewhere else if this installation is in existence. That I just wanted to ask Director Coleman if she could comment on that before we move forward, that's all.
Director Coleman?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Through you to Councillor Cabral. If you just bear with me a minute, and I'm only estimating the distance from Albert Street to, the distance between Albert Street and the proposed entrance to the subdivision would be about 200 meters. As CAO Schmidt mentioned, we wouldn't be entertaining two sets of signal lights. It would strictly be the intersection pedestrian crossing at Albert Street. There wouldn't be signalization at the street to the subdivision.
Councillor Ritchie?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Just to take that a step further, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if memory serves me correctly, the last time we dealt with that subdivision, I thought that new entranceway was going to be across from that Patrick going into the west part there. And it would be right opposite from that. What the hell's the name? What's the name of that? It's right across from that. And then we were going to build walkways up to this intersection is what we were going to do. But I'm pretty sure, but, and again, this will all be engineered. But I just want to speak, Mayor Allen, about these engineers and the MTO. When we did Mill Street a number of years ago, we started off at 900,000. By the time we were done, we were close to 3 million. We found skeletons in there. We had to replace just about everything. And we took all the water off 93 Highway, and the MTO gave us no money for that whatsoever. We did all of that on our own dime. The people in Hillsdale has been asking for this since these new lights went in back in our second term. We hear the stories all the time at the Hillsdale rec meetings. I do agree with Councillor Cabral about getting the people involved with that. But if it means phasing it in, well, I have to agree. I'd rather have a person there to say, whoa, Johnny, stay here instead of a set of lights, but we can't have both. But we've been hearing full well from the people over the years about the dangers of the present system that's there now. So moving to something, even what we do now, and if it doesn't get happen until next year, we can have enough meetings there to satisfy the public. Those are my comments.
Thank you. Yes, they're hearing from the crosswalk guard and hearing from the residents, there will be a serious injury or a fatality. It's just a matter of when. as I say, I'll share the comments with you. We can have them come and further delegate, but I don't want on our watch to have a serious injury or a fatality in this situation that we've been duly warned. Okay. All right, I'll read the motion. That the report from the Director of Public Works regarding the pedestrian crossing signal on Highway 93 in Hillsdale be received, and that council direct staff to procure the services of a traffic engineer for the design and a contractor for the installation of an intersection pedestrian signal on Highway 93 in Hillsdale, and that a budget of $225,000 be approved from the one-time additional gas tax funds and the modernization funds, with staff updating council as necessary and seeking approval as required by the township procurement bylaw. And I would request a recorder vote, please, Madam Clerk.
A recorded vote has been requested by Mayor Allen. When I state your name, please state yes or no. Councillor Cabral,
Yes.
Councillor Hanna,
Yes.
Councillor Chapman,
Yes.
Councillor Moore,
Yes.
Councillor Ritchie,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Coughlin,
Yes.
and Mayor Allen.
Yes.
That motion is carried.
Thank you. Moving on to overview of the draft 220 budget, CAO Schmidt. Thank you. Deputy Mayor Coughlin?
Thank you, Marilyn, and just for council and the audience, I do remain in conflict when there's issues pertaining to the new development in Hillsdale, so I wasn't sure where that conversation was going, and I didn't want to put this council or the chamber in any conflict, so that's why I chose to remove myself.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Go ahead, see you. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and members of council, staff, and the billions and billions streaming today, listening to our budget process. So before I get started here, you should have received a couple of different additions to your package. So the tab 4 of your budget binders, as I mentioned in an email, has been revised to add the clerk's department business plan as well as finances. In addition to that, we've provided you with a statement of our reserves and reserve funds as they stand at the end of 2018. Obviously, we haven't finished 2019, so those are still being calculated. So you do have those for 2018, as well as we've provided, there was a discussion, I guess, on Monday evening regarding annualized costs for program change forms. So we've provided that in an additional appendix here for you to review what those annual impacts would be. So those are the three additional items that we've provided to you. So today, the intent of today's discussion is really, the first part is to provide council with an overview of the budget and where we stand with our reserves and reserve funds and debt and a few other matters. And then we get into each of the individual departments, so go tab by tab as identified in your budget binders. So with that said, the agenda as we have here, and this agenda really spans over all of our remaining budget sessions. So essentially from agenda item number 1 to 4, we're looking at covering today. And then, of course, anything that we don't cover in item 4, we would try to circle back on Monday and finish that, as well as to discuss items 5, 6, and 7. And then the intent is on December 9th to get into the capital plan. So just to give everybody kind of a sense of where we're going here today, or where we hope to go. So with that said, I just wanted to kind of again reiterate the budget process to date. Obviously, there's been lots of work that's gone into the budget thus far, and I thank staff in attendance today, as well as those that may not have be in attendance that have had a role to play in the budget to date. So you may recall back on August 7th, we did come to council with a budget directions report. And that's something we typically do on an annual basis to make sure that council is aware of where we're heading with the budget, and we outline some of the timelines in that report. So once council essentially had that report, we moved forward with developing our business plans and our base budgets and our capital plans. So over the months of August to November, those were completed by the various departments. And then program change requests were considered and initiated in September and discussed and revamped and revised on through to November. The draft budget and final senior management review was conducted in October, November. And then the finalized budget or revised budget that we had, were willing to come to council with, if you will, was completed in November. And finally, we tabled the budget on November 20th, last Wednesday. So obviously, there's been some work done here through the process. So again, just to reiterate the budget timelines or the meetings that we have scheduled to discuss the budget. So there was a discussion on Monday evening. We're here today to discuss. We also plan to meet on December 2nd, December 9th, and December 11th if need be, with the hope of having a budget approved by December 18th, sorry. And that again is tentative and subject to council's approval. So to get into some of the budget directions that was provided by council on August 7th, again, the budget and business plan was prepared based on the cost of maintaining existing programs and services that are currently being provided in 2019. Costs associated with infrastructure that is operated and maintained by the township, so our capital infrastructure. A reasonable estimate of assessment growth, and we'll get into that as we discuss further information as it relates to the budget. A cost of living allowance was calculated, and this is based on past practice, and this is a resolution that council has passed in previous years. So the calculation based on this came out to a 2.21% COLA, or cost of living adjustment or allowance. We looked at anticipated workloads in 2020. In addition to that, from a water and wastewater side of things, as you may recall, there was the wastewater rate study that came forward in 2017. Council did approve that the water rates remain for 2018, 19, and 20 at a 0% increase. And on the wastewater side, that the wastewater increase at a 4.3% increase on an annual basis for 2018, 19, and 20. So that's how the budget's been prepared. In addition to that, as we've done in past years, any new services and or new employees or new requests for employees have been presented in the budget as a program change. And you've obviously had some of those discussions on Monday evening, and we'll continue to have some of those discussions as it relates to excuse me, the township initiated program changes. So to get into the draft 2020 consolidated budget, again, just to give everybody a basis of how we approach the budget, essentially these are building blocks. So we do, from an operating budget perspective, we have three main operating budgets. We have a tax-based, so that's primarily funded by property taxes. We have a water and wastewater, and then also a wastewater operating budget. Water being primarily funded by water rates, and wastewater primarily funded from wastewater rates, so no property tax impacts there. And then, of course, we have our capital budget. We have a 10-year capital budget. The first year of that, we have a 10-year capital plan, and the first year of that capital plan is the capital budget. So in 2020, that would be our capital budget. So with all of that in place, we come up with our proposed consolidated budget, which includes all four of those requirements. So on that, from a numbers perspective, we have our tax-supported operating budget, where essentially should be a little bit of a refresher from last Wednesday. Essentially, our gross expenditures are less than our gross revenues in 2020, and so we're actually in a net tax levy surplus position, hence meaning $95,000 to the good, and we aren't requiring council's approval to increase taxes on our base budget, if you will. This doesn't include program changes. On the water rates side of the business, in making sure that we have a balanced budget, we have a $3.2 million budget from a water side, and it's fully funded. Wastewater, similarly, we have a $1.6 million budget, fully funded, and then from a 2020 capital budget, we have $18.7 million, and that's fully funded as well. So overall, a $44.5 million budget, consolidated budget for 2020. Just to, again, preface things, a 1% tax increase in 2020 equates to approximately $132,000 in change. And as I mentioned earlier, the 2020 proposed township side of things, there is no tax levy increase at this stage, assuming no program changes. On the policing charge side of things, we talked about this last week as well. We did increase the policing charge in 2019, to $240 per property, except for the farmland and managed forest properties. Those are being charged a policing charge of $120. We're proposing that these remain the same in 2019, so no change to the policing charge. So what does that look like from an average assessed home? And an average assessed home in 2020 has an average assessment of $478,000 and change. And that number is provided to us from the Municipal Property Assessment Corporation. So from a township perspective, again, no program change is considered here. We're looking at a 0% increase. From the County of Simcoe portion, I'm not sure if they've approved their budget, but my understanding is they're looking at seeking a 2% increase. So that equates to approximately $26.72 increase for the county. When we take into account the education portion, we're assuming it's tax neutral or revenue neutral at this stage. And then, of course, the policing charge, we're not looking at an increase there. So again, for an average residential property assessed at $478,000, you're looking at roughly a $27 increase or a 0.67% blended tax increase. This slide here provides council with a little bit of historical information as it relates to our tax increases over the last number of years. Obviously, the furthest column to the right, the proposed, is still subject to change. But in 2019, the township did have a 1.93% tax levy increase, which equated, for an average assessed home, it equated to roughly $29.45. The county had a 2% increase. The policing charge was at $240. The blended rate increase was 1.76, which equated to roughly $67 increase in 2019. So again, just some historical information there for council to consider. So changing gears here on the reserve side of things, I think most people around the table or members of council understand what a reserve is, but a reserve is an allocation from net revenue at the discretion of council. So essentially putting contingency money aside for future replacement and or future purposes. So whether you take it into consideration, you want to go on a trip or you want to buy a car, you put money aside, and hopefully over time you've set aside enough money to be able to purchase or go on that trip. So similar from a reserve side. And I know every year I get this question, so I figured that maybe I'd try to answer it a little bit differently. With regards to the comment about reserves not earning interest, so they do earn interest, obviously. There's money sitting in our bank account, and our bank account does earn interest. But what this means is that the interest that's earned on those funds aren't actually transferred back to the reserves. So on that reserve and reserve fund schedule that we provided to you, the interest that's borne on those funds in the reserves only section isn't put back into those reserves. It's actually accumulated and put into our investment income account. So we do earn interest. It's just how we actually treat it internally is a little different, that's all, than what we do on the reserve funds. In the reserve funds, we do actually allocate the interest back to the reserve fund. So hopefully that clarifies things, but I'll take questions if council's not clear on that. So again, historical information here from 2014 to 2018, both from a general purpose and from a capital reserve perspective. So the general purpose being the graphs or the bars in blue. For the most part, from 2014 to 2018, our general purpose reserves have remained fairly stable over that time. With regards to our capital reserves, they have increased over the last number of years. Obviously in 2018 there was a dip, and that was mainly due to some of the capital investments that happened in 2018 as it related to our 2018 capital budget. On a forecast perspective, we are looking at, so this takes into account 2019 to 2023. So the general purpose, again, the bars in blue, for the most part, those are remaining fairly stable. There is a little bit of a dip from 2019 to 2020, and that is due to what we're proposing in the 2020 capital plan. And in addition, the capital reserves are also looking at being reduced from 2019 to 2020, again, due to the investments that we're proposing in the 10-year capital plan, or more specifically in the 2020 capital budget. On the reserve fund side of things, again, we have essentially two types of reserve funds, one being permissive or council-initiated and or discretionary. And then on the other side, we have the regulatory reserve funds, which are more mandated by provincial statute and or obligatory. So the obligatory being more the development charges, there are restrictions on how we can spend those funds, whereas the discretionary, an example would be the library capital fund, where council has specifically set aside funds specifically for library capital requirements. So those are the two differences there. And again, as I mentioned, reserve funds do earn interest, and that interest does get put back into the reserve fund that's applicable. As part of the obligatory reserve funds, we have development charges. So development charges provide for the recovery of growth-related capital expenditures from new development. So again, just to make sure we're all clear, if we have a capital project whereby we're replacing an existing asset and it's basically one for one, we're not doing any expansion or anything like that, we cannot use development charges to fund that project. Essentially, it would have to have some type of growth requirement added to it. So if you have a 2-lane road and we end up expanding it to a 4-lane road to accommodate growth, well then that expansion component of it, so roughly, let's say 50%, would be DC eligible. Obviously, the existing component would still not be DC eligible. So development charges are obviously dictated through the Development Charges Act, and they are levied on residential, industrial, commercial, and institutional development. In the township, we typically will collect development charges upon building permit issuance, and we do that through our current development charge bylaw. And with that said, our current development charge bylaw is still under appeal, but we are working with the landowners and or the individuals that have submitted appeals, and hopefully that will be resolved in 2020 as we move through that process. So similar to the reserves, on the reserve funds, we have historical data here for our discretionary, those being in blue, and our obligatory. So the discretionary have continued to increase over the number of years. In 2018, they did dip off a little bit, and that's due to some of the water and wastewater investments that we made in 2018. And on the obligatory side of things, again, those are mainly the development charges. Those were increasing from 2014 to 2016, and then we saw a slight dip in 2017, and then another decrease in 2018, again, related to growth-related capital infrastructure investments that have happened in 2018. From a forecast perspective, again, from a 2019 to 2023 perspective, again, discretionary being the blue, the dip in 2019 to 2020 is heavily related to water and wastewater related capital proposed projects in the 2020 capital budget. And then from there, we look like, the graph is showing that our discretionary reserves are starting to increase again. On the obligatory side of things, again, due to what's proposed in the 2020 budget, we are looking at some other growth-related capital infrastructure projects. And then, of course, in 2021 and 2022 and 2023, we look at growing those reserve funds again. From a debt perspective, at the end of 2019, we're estimated to have total outstanding debt of $3.9 million. Of this $3.9 million, $2.6 million is associated with this facility that we're in today, and then the other $1.3 million relates to various road projects that we've debentured in the past. This slide always fun. So, existing debt capacity. So, let me try to walk you through this one. So, again, our annual repayment limit, which is related to debt capacity, is based on 2 years prior. So our
I think we'll let him make the presentation, and then we'll ask questions after. Thank you.
Sorry. So from an annual repayment limit perspective, it's always based on your financial information return from 2 years prior. So for 2019, it would be based on for our 2019 annual payment limit, it would be based on the FIR that we submitted in 2017. So in 2017, our net revenues were $20 million. So 25% of those net revenues equates to $5 million, and the 25%, as mentioned in the description below, the provincial government allows municipalities to borrow up to 25% of their own net revenues. So 25% of 20 million being 5 million. So that's the ceiling, if you will. And then you take into account what your debt servicing costs are in 2017, and that would, in 2017, it was 1.3 million. So 5 million less the 1.3 million equates to the $3.7 million. So if we take the 3.7 divided by the 5, essentially we have available debt capacity of approximately 74%. Or on the other side, if we look at what we've used, essentially it's the 1.3 divided by the 5 million, comes out with the 26% of what we used. I will say that the annual repayment limit in 2019 is a little skewed, and why it's a little skewed is because in 2017, staff came to council and recommended that we pay off our water loan that we had. It was about $660,000 of a water loan that was due. It was maturing, and instead of actually going back out and having to debenture that and or to take another loan out for another 5 or 6 years and incurring additional interest, we came to council and council approved that we go ahead and just make that payment because we had substantial funds in our water reserve in order to do that. So I would suggest that the available debt capacity is actually higher than 74%. I would say it's probably in around more about the 80-85% range. But again, that would be something that if we were to look at maximizing our debt capacity, I'm not suggesting we would do that. But if we had to, then that would be a conversation that we would go back to the province and talk to them about to say, hey, listen, you know what, I think the calculation for 2019 is a little skewed, but thankfully we don't have to do that. So, unless council has other ideas about issuing debt in 2020. So, the next slide here is the 2020 annual debt servicing costs. These are estimated at this stage. So we are looking at approximately $1.1 million in principal and interest payments in 2020. So how does that broken down? $280,000 is towards this facility. $805,000, give or take, is for roads. And then we also have tile drains that approximately $20,000. The first two are funded through taxation. The third one, being the tile drains, is funded directly through third party. We just play mediator, if you will, or facilitator. But essentially, those funds are transferred from the province to us, and then from us to the third party, and vice versa. So there is no tax impact on the tile drains. From a debt forecast perspective, again, we're looking out from 2019 to 2023. We are looking at, based on our 10-year capital plan, and this is subject to change, obviously. We're looking at right now issuing $4 million in debt in 2020, $10.1 million in 2021, 6.3 in 2022, and 1.7 million in 2023. And again, this is subject to change depending on how the 10-year capital plan unfolds. But as it stands right now, this is what we were looking at. Maybe I'll stop right here, and I know there's a question, so before we get into some of the other stuff here, I can take some questions.
Councillor Cabral?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Actually, one question was answered, but another one did pop up. I recall at some point in time we were talking about municipalities that were, I guess, negative financing. They were basically financing some of their own projects. Is that something that we might be in a position to do when we look at what our debt servicing costs are of $1 million, let's say, for the roads and the building itself? Is that something that council might be in a position to consider, given that we do have, you know, we're fairly solid, I would say, yeah.
CEO Schmidt?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, great question, and that's somewhat what we've been doing, to be quite honest with you. So last year, you may have recalled that I believe I was sitting here saying we'd likely issue $4 to $5 million in 2019. We didn't issue any debt in 2019 because what we've been doing is internal financing, essentially. So I know there's a comment from a member of council on the debt piece saying why, if we're issuing $4 million in 2020, why isn't there a bigger impact from 2019 to 2020 on the principal interest? It's because, again, I didn't issue anything in 2020 or 2019, and I've readjusted, and essentially I'm saying, yeah, we are in a position where we might have to issue $4 million in 2020, but again, my preference would be to try to internal finance as much as we can. So, trying to do that. We do have the luxury to some degree, if you will, from a cash flow perspective to be able to do that. But there is going to be, obviously, come a time where additional debt, assuming that council wants to move forward with some of these major projects, we will likely have to consider issuing debt, so.
Deputy Mayor Coughlin?
Thank you, Mayor Allen, and through you, just a couple questions on the statement for the reserves and reserve funds. Is that now or later? Now?
Try.
All right. So just on the first note, the admin capital, what does that encompass? And how is that separate from operating?
CEO?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Deputy Mayor. So the admin capital is more specific to this particular piece of property. So we do, or this facility, we do on an annual basis, you'll see, we do transfer some money on an annual basis for the future replacement, if you will, and or upgrades to this facility. So we are trying to put some money aside on an annual basis to do improvements or look after this facility.
And then the transfer from, was that the renovation downstairs?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Secondly, there's about 4 of them. Municipal fire services, it's, to my recollection, the Public Works building renovation was funded from fire reserve, and I'm just not seeing it here on Public Works or on fire, and it was about 900, or was that from the year prior, so not showing?
CEO?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That one, trying to remember the timing on that. So I'm not sure if all of the expenditures were incurred in 2018 or some of them were incurred in 2019. That one I'm going to have to double check on, to be honest with you. I believe I believe the budget was 800. I believe it was slightly over that amount, though. I'm trying to remember, though, how we financed that one.
Okay.
I'm not sure if we actually touched the fire reserve. I think we ended up actually using some DCs because ultimately the purpose of that facility will be for Public Works and Parks and Rec. So I believe we actually may have drawn some funds out of the DC for that and not touched the fire. But again, I'll have to double check
Okay.
that for you.
Third one would be the hydro reserve fund,
Yeah.
which is the Elmville Reserve, to my knowledge.
Yeah.
And it's still showing a balance of over 400, and I thought that that's how we did the splash pad.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Deputy Mayor Coughlin. So no, so the splash pad was actually DC funded, and then the remaining 10% was from Parkland Reserve funds. The hydro reserve is actually slated for the EDHS. So on the EDHS, we have a commitment to fund $50,000 every year for 10 years, I believe it is, so up to $500,000. So the intent is that we would draw out of the hydro reserve fund, and then any remainder we would draw from, I'm trying to remember the other reserve now. I'd have to double check the actual other reserve, sorry. But that's, I believe we did change that where it was being drawn from the hydro reserve. Actually, sorry, no. So I believe a portion was being drawn from DCs, and then the remaining balance that's required would be drawn from the hydro reserve to the extent that we needed it. Sorry, that's what I believe it was.
And that's the same, so that's, it's just not.
So we're not showing,
Follow
so
up on
on that, we're not showing any payments made to EDHS as of yet, because the contract, the agreement was only signed by the township in August of 2019. And I'm not sure if they've signed it yet, but, so we haven't made any payment to them in regards to that $500,000 commitment.
Okay, and then the same fund, and maybe I have the wrong one, but it says hydro reserve, and that's the only hydro reserve fund
Correct.
that we have.
Yep.
So there's 9,700 going into the reserve, and I'm just curious as to why we're still putting money in a reserve fund that the terms of reference for was no longer.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, to the Deputy Mayor, so you may recall that we loaned funds to the Elmville Curling Club,
Oh, okay.
and so they're required to make interest payments to us and principal payments, and so the majority of that is the actual interest owed back to us.
Okay, perfect.
So,
And then the last one is the Parks and Development Facility DC, and that has been, I'm assuming, transferred to a different reserve fund or reserve? And I just can't follow that.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Deputy Mayor Coughlin. So yes, so when we updated our DC, so the funds, so the balance in that account would have been transferred into the indoor and outdoor rec DC reserve fund in 2018.
Okay, so
So
then,
the 677,000 would be part of the 1.2 million that's being transferred in.
interesting. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions at this point, or we continue on? Yes, Councillor Ritchie.
Speaking of the hydro fund, there's 100,000 earmarked to come out of it for the food bank, I believe, when we get that thing up and running, hopefully for next year. Correct me on that.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to
Yes.
Councillor Ritchie. That's correct. So again, back to the EDHS, I misspoke. I believe the 500,000 that's committed, the majority of that is to come from DC, and then
Yeah.
any remainder that's required that we don't have in DC would come from the hydro reserve.
That's right.
But
That's
then
right.
you are correct that the Elmville Food Bank is contemplated to be pulled from the hydro reserve.
Yeah, it was 100, 100, and 100. We put up 100, food bank puts up 100, and they raise 100. It was 300 there,
Correct.
the way we did it, but that'll get ironed out as we move along.
Correct.
Thank you.
Proceed, please.
Thank you. So speaking directly now to the tax-supported operating budget, again, this is the operating budget essentially that covers all of our spending as it relates to fire and emergency services, roads and bridge maintenance, not capital, but roads and bridge maintenance, streetlights, parks, library, et cetera. And again, it's the primary means by which most of our financing, acquisitions, and spending happens. This is the budget that, from a property tax perspective, this directly has an impact on property taxes. So when we look at this tax, or this budget alone, the gross expenditures in 2019 exceeded our gross revenues in 2019, and hence we did ask for council's approval for $233,000. That was approved by council. However, in 2020, we are in a different position whereby, as I mentioned earlier, our revenues are actually exceeding our gross expenditures, and hence we're actually in a net surplus position of approximately $95,000. The next couple of slides hopefully are intended to provide council with some of the major budget drivers or pressures in 2020. And again, these are meant to provide you with what are the major causes for the increases in expenditures versus the increases in revenues. So the first item is the annualized cost for new staff that were approved in 2019. There is a $221,000 impact, or 1.67%. The cost of living adjustment, this excludes the library, as I mentioned, was 2.21%, equated to a $164,000 number. There is an increase in contracted services, or a proposed increase in contracted service for hot mix asphalt patching, sealing and dust suppressants, which equates to $108,000. You will recall that back earlier in October, we came to council with EDHS staffing, and so there's annualized costs there that have to be considered in 2020, and that comes at around a $99,000 number. The anticipated cost for the township for proposed works in Swaley Drain is approximately $70,000, and you may be questioning as to why that's coming back, because in 2019 there was some asks. We have got updated, I'm going to get this wrong, drainage schedules, I believe is what it is, whereby the amount of money that's being required by the township is different than what it has been in the past. So they're updated schedules, and I believe Mr. Smart will be coming forward in 2020 to discuss that with council and provide an update on the Swilly Drain project. And then, as part of the EDHS agreement, this is in addition to the staffing request, there is a requirement for us to pay to the school board. So this includes $39,000, which is for the utilities essentially for that space, as well as a requirement for us to put some money away to transfer some money into a reserve. And so that equates to $49,000 in 2020. We're looking at making some minor capital improvements in a number of our facilities, community halls. Again, these are minor capital improvements, so that equates to approximately $47,000. We talked about the additional long-term debt, so that equates to approximately $39,000. We are looking at, and this was discussed last Thursday at the town hall in Grenfell, we are looking at conducting a facility assessment study on all of our facilities and at least our community halls. That comes in, the actual gross amount is $50,000, but we're looking at the net impact is $25,000 as a portion of that study can be funded through some gas tax funds. And that also will help assist us with our asset management initiative. We need more up-to-date information on our facilities and what those conditions of those facilities are to be able to better plan for those facilities down the road. The next item is the increase to capital infrastructure reserve. So just to clarify on this one, essentially every year we look at contributing 1% to a capital reserve to help us with our infrastructure gap. So in 2020, we're looking at increasing the number from 2019 to 2020 by $12,000. And again, that's just a differential in the 1% tax impact. In addition, in 2020, we're looking at increased investment income. So we have changed our investment policy. We have gone to the one fund, and we have seen some increases in our investments. And so we're estimating an increase of $35,000 there in our overall investment portfolio. We are looking at an increase in our fire call revenues for both county and township roads in the amount of $34,000. There was an increase in the Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund funds in 2020. Of approximately $27,500. And then, as you may know, the Springwater Sports Heritage, they have an induction ceremony every 2 years. And so this is a little bit skewed, but we have donation revenue and ticket sales in the amount of approximately $19,500 that we didn't have in 2019, just due to the every other year cycle for that ceremony. So from a township-only perspective, the net tax levy requirement or the added expenditures in 2020 is $718,000, or a 5.43% increase. Then when we look at the service partners, and some of this was discussed on Monday, so from a library perspective, the cost of living adjustment equated to $11,000 and change. The WSIB, there was a change actually in WSIB workers' comp for all of us actually, coming in 2020, whereby the library now is actually included with the rest of the township, and so their premium rating has been brought into the same mix as the township, which is causing obviously a pressure on the library side, which, you know, we're going to go back to WSCB and try to fight this because we don't feel that's correct. Obviously, the services that are provided by the library, more from, and no disrespect to them, from an administration side of things, is not the same as what the rest of the township provides, so they really shouldn't be combined in the same rating group, but that's the WSIB, and they've made that change, but again, it's going to take some time for us to circle back with them and to try to fix this or request an adjustment. In addition to that, their increase in general levy was approximately $35,000, and again, some of that was discussed on Monday. The NVCA, we talked about that on Monday as well. So a general levy, they're looking at just over a $6,000 increase. Their asset management looking at just under a $1,500 increase. And then the SSEA, the general levy, is approximately a $31,000 impact. With Orr Lake, it's an additional just under $6,000. So overall, for the service partners, they're looking at approximately just under a $105,000 increase over their expenditures last year, or 0.79%. So when we take this all into consideration, we take the township, we take the service partners, we have a combined increase in expenditures of approximately $823,000. However, when we take into account what we're expecting in new revenue as it relates to assessment, that comes in at a number of just under $920,000. And hence, as I mentioned, if you take the 823 less than 920, we come to a surplus of approximately $95,000 in 2020. So this slide here and the next one is to provide council with a little more information as to where the different changes are happening within the various departments. So from a council, and we'll get into each one of these sections as we move forward in this presentation, but so from a council perspective, year over year from 2020 to 2019, there was approximately just over a $5,000 increase. In general administration, so general administration includes myself, my area, HR, clerk's office, information technology, finance, heritage, cemeteries, licensing, as well in 2020, and I'll put this out there, that we are looking to move bylaw enforcement back under the clerk's department as opposed to where it currently resides, which is under the building department. So that is something that we're looking at changing in 2020, and hence the budget for 2020 has been presented that way. From a fire services and emergency management perspective, we actually have a reduction of approximately $92,000, and we'll speak to that in a little bit. Building services, there is no net tax impact. It's fully funded from user fees, and hence why it's showing zero here. Public Works, there's a $336,000 increase. Recreation, Parks, and again, another change for 2020. Facilities, we've changed it from Recreation, Parks, and Properties to Recreation, Parks, and Facilities. Semantics, but that's what we're looking at. They're looking at an increase of just under $250,000. Planning, Committee of Adjustment, Economic Development, and our Community Improvement Plan, there's an increase there of approximately $76,000. The BIA, similar to Building Services, is fully funded from fees, if you will, and hence there's no tax impact for the BIA. From a conservation perspective, both Nottawasaga Valley and from the Severn Sound, and we combine both of them, we're looking at just under a $45,000 increase year over year. The library is just under a $60,000 increase, and again, this does not include program changes, just to be clear. Policing, again, policing is recovered through the policing charge, so no net tax impact here. Overall, our corporate revenues have increased by $1.1 million. So if we take into account the net expenditures before program changes in 2020, we were looking at an increase, again, before program changes, we were looking at an increase of just over $120,000. In 2020, as I mentioned, we're in a surplus position of $95,000. When we take into account the program changes that were actually approved in 2019, that equated to approximately $113,000 for an overall request or council approved $233,000 increase in our net tax levy in 2019. In 2020, we're looking at program changes, although this number now needs to be adjusted due to the decisions that were made on Monday, so my apologies. This does still include the library, so with the library it was $292,000 for an overall ask of $197,000, which includes program changes. So at this stage, I think we wanted to kind of start getting into the different tabs of the budget binder and specific questions that council may have regarding the various areas. So the first tab that we have slated here is council, and so, so from a council perspective, as I mentioned, it's a $5,417 impact, or a 0.04% increase. Essentially, this slide here describes what that pressure is. So essentially, it's mainly all coming from cost of living adjustment. So, that's kind of driving the council budget in 2020. And I don't know if we wanted to pause and have council ask any questions as we go through each of these tabs. So I think if there's questions, by all means, we can try to answer those questions now.
Deputy Mayor Conklin.
Thank you, Marilyn. The highlighted slide 30, 32, 35, do you want me to wait until they come up again during the specific tabs, or on slide 30 specifically?
30?
30. EDHS, partnership agreement. I know some members of council have had updates on the agreement and that we are close to signing, or I'm assuming that we still haven't signed it.
Signed.
Is
No,
it possible to?
It's signed.
It is signed?
Township signed it, yeah. Came to council in August.
I thought that there was changes though. See, this is where I'm very, very confused, is because to myself and members of the community that I'm speaking to, it's not the same agreement that we agreed to or fundraised for or supported. And is it possible to be updated as to how all this has now transpired? I guess there's no, now that it's signed. Sorry, that's news to me. I think specifically there's community partners. I know the Lions Group who fundraised money for equipment for a gym that no longer exists. An outbuilding, my apologies, the gym exists, the outbuilding no longer exists. I think that what it was pictured to be, what it was explained to as the community, and even myself, like, to me, any other school throughout Simcoe County or at large, Simcoe County, or the school board takes care of the person on staff and the booking. And so when you're doing an agreement, to me, these costs that are coming forward to us now, I wasn't aware of them, whether that's my own fault or it just has been changes. This is shocking to me, and the fact that I'm not suggesting that we're just taking it, but it's changed. The face of it is completely changed. The residents have questions. I'm unable to answer them. And I'm looking at $150,000 worth of changes which are going to become part of an ongoing operating budget on the taxpayers' dime year after year. That is, if you went to another school, absorbed through the school board funding. So to me, I'm just very curious as to why the residents of Springwater are being treated different by the school board than any other, in my knowledge, school area.
CEO Schmidt?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you to Deputy Mayor Coughlin. So I'll try to answer as best I can. I wasn't involved in the discussions and negotiations on the contract, so I don't know. All I do know is that the agreement did come to council in August for execution, and council did approve it. At that time, I believe it did indicate in the agreement that there was a $39,000 commitment, which is essentially, I'm not sure if it's a fixed cost, but it's supposed to represent the utility component and such for that facility. With that said, we do have, at the last council meeting, there is a representative committee, which I believe Councillor Ritchie is on, which will meet once or twice a year to discuss what's happening at that facility. But also there's a working committee, which is more staff related. So we have two of our staff, our recreation and special events coordinator, as well as our manager of parks and facilities is on that committee. And so again, these are the types of things that can be discussed, and we can try to resolve these things. There was a comment made about the donation from the Lions Club, so I did have a conversation with them last week about that. The funds are still in the township's hands. We have not provided any of the fundraising funds to the school board for this project. We haven't transferred any money to them at this stage. So again, the $50,000 commitment, as well as any fundraising, nothing has been transferred at this stage. So, you know, there are still things that we can try to negotiate, and again, it's to try to be a partner in this and try to make this work. Yeah, we do have some concerns as well from a staff perspective. I'm not going to lie to you. You know, it's some of the things that we need to discuss further with the school board and the school specifically about how some of these things are going to transpire. Unfortunately, when the agreement did come forward, there was no request for staff, and hence we had to come to council in October and seek council's approval for staffing to try to get this thing up and running. We are in a position where we've hired the scheduling and booking clerk. I believe we've hired the casual and facility attendants now, and staff have been working with some groups. I believe the pickleball group is now in there on a pilot project. I believe they were in last night, and I believe the week before, and they're trying this out. Again, it's going to take some time to walk through this, but yeah, there's a dollar commitment there, unfortunately. So,
CAO, the revenue that will be charged, will that offset any of these two amounts potentially? And I know we probably haven't budgeted for that yet because we're not sure how fast the take-up will be, but can you comment on that, please?
thank you, Mr. Mayor. So of the 99,000 that's showing there, it is actually a net impact of $99,000. So there is approximately about $30,000, give or take, of revenue that we projected for 2020 Again, hopefully we're gonna make a lot more than that, but with staff, again, at this stage, we've kind of maybe lowballed it because we don't know. It's still up in the air. But to answer your question, part of the agreement is, yes, any revenues that are generated through this facility are to offset costs directly related to that facility. Is it going to be break even? I don't think so, but that's just my own opinion.
Just follow on. I remember in that report we last looked at, there was a number of $39,000. So how does that equate to those two numbers up there?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, the 39,000 equates to the third line from the bottom, the contracted services per EHS agreement. So the 39,000 is in there. In addition to the 39,000 in the agreement, we're required to also transfer funds to a reserve for the future replacement of equipment. And so there's an additional $10,000 equated in that number.
Okay, any questions down there? Councillor Hannah?
Thank you. Through the chair to you, sir. Slide 32, it talks about budget pressures. The very last thing in there, I just want clarification. The donation revenue ticket sales for the Springwater Sports Heritage Induction Ceremony, that's no tax dollar impact. That's just passes through the township county. Is that correct?
CEO?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hannah, that is funds that are directly related to sports heritage, and so they collect those funds and they use some of those funds to offset their ceremony in 2020, yeah.
Deputy Mayor?
Thank you. Slide 32, specific to WSIB. Recall from years ago, surprised that there was a blended amount. Is admin yet separated from Public Works or Parks and Rec, or is there a blended rate still for the entire admin? Wow.
Yeah. So again, the WSIB, and this is something that staff's trying to get our heads wrapped around, WSIB has a new rating structure proposed for 2020. So it is something, unfortunately, they've combined the library and the rest of the municipality in one premium rating group, which, again, we don't agree with. But even to your point, Deputy Mayor, even within the township, separated from the library, yeah, we do have obviously inside staff that really shouldn't be treated the same way as outside staff, but that's how WSIB has kind of developed their model, unfortunately, so.
Just for my own curiosity, what is our percentage, our blended percentage? I can follow up with you on that one, that's no problem.
Yeah,
And then last,
sorry, I don't have that number right in front of me, but
last one, on 35, it showed BIA with no impact, and from what I recall, there is, yes, so BIA, I thought that there was, or is that through economic development funding? The money that's set aside for the BIA annually, is that from ECDEV, so it's, the ECDEV is showing as a tax impact, or is there?
through you, Mr. Mayor, to Deputy Mayor Coggins, so the BIA, every business that's included in the BIA has to pay an additional charge, a BIA charge, if you will. And so those funds are collected, and then there's expenditures that offset, and to the extent that they utilize the funds and they're in a surplus position, funds are transferred to the reserve, which is in the reserve and reserve fund schedule, and to the extent that they're overspent, then we draw on the reserve, so there is no tax impact.
Follow on?
Yeah, sorry, and I'm no longer on the committee, but it was to my understanding that there was, and through you to Councillor Cabral, there's $27,000 or $30,000 a year that the municipality gives to the BIA for their own enhancements, so I'm just wondering.
Yeah. It's an additional charge to the businesses. It's a separate charge. It's an additional charge that we charge the businesses.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, move on, please.
So if there's no more questions on the council, sorry.
Councillor Hannah?
Thanks. Through the chair to you. Yes, I have questions on council. Training. In 2018, council training was only $16,000. We bumped it up in 2019 to $30,350. Currently, year to date, we're only at $13,322. And I think we're being awful generous in giving council $30,000 well, $30,500 in 2020 for training, keeping in mind that training and travel, we took away the travel allowance for council members to attend council meetings. So we saved money there. And I know in 2019, being a new council, there was probably a need for additional training, given the integrity commissioner training, if you like, given the inaugural training. So I'm suggesting that we're pretty, I don't want to use the word stingy, but we're trying to be responsible with all staff when it comes to training and other expenditures. And I just think as council, we might want to take a look at cutting that 30,000 in half. It just seems awful high to me when you take a look at our year-to-date, and it's not even $15,000 yet. We're looking for 30,500 in 2020. I guess my motion would be, I would like to see us cut that in half.
CEO Schmidt?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Councillor Hanna. So included in that is travel, as you mentioned, and so there was a slight reduction in the travel. But then there's also allocations, if you will, for each councillor and for the mayor and deputy mayor. So the allocations are $2,000 for each member of council, and the mayor and deputy mayor have an allocation of $4,500. So that, I believe, was determined in 2019's budget, 2019's budget. So again, to provide for the opportunity for members of council to attend conferences, and I believe the mayor and deputy mayor was to attend potentially 2 conferences. So it's an allocation if council wishes to change it.
Okay, Councillor Cabal?
Thank you very much. Mayor Allen, the training aspect portion, I think something that we have to take into consideration is myself being a new council member, I took one training session that I thought would be beneficial to me to help me and get me going, but I certainly was not in a position to attend some of the other conferences and whatnot, which would be deemed as training sessions, not because I didn't want to, because I wanted to get a feel for what this initial year was. And when I looked back at how the progressed before, it seems to me that the first year of a council term, a lot of those funds aren't utilized. But when we look back at some of the other years towards the end of the council term, I think council members do see and recognize other opportunities for training and advancement. And so I don't think this is a very realistic representation of what is there and what was actually used. I think it's just been underutilized this particular year. Thank you.
CEO Schmidt?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you to members of council. So just on that too, so again, the idea is that we provide an allocation. Whether council uses it or not is subject to each individual around the table. With that said, if we do make a change to this, or council suggests that a change is made to this, and so say a reduction, and then next year you want to obviously potentially increase it. The idea was to try to smooth it out over the years so that council had an opportunity to attend. If the numbers aren't right or the allocations aren't right, then I'm willing to have that conversation with council. But the idea was to try to provide some opportunity for members of the council should they wish to attend. Again, if you wish to make a change, then we're open to that.
Councillor Moore?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. 2 questions. The first one regarding benefits. I'm wondering why the huge jump in benefits for 2020 over 2019, because I don't remember changing anything in the HR policy. Well, I didn't see anything. Maybe you could explain that to me. And secondly, if I could get the history on why travel was removed from council members' allowance, because I'd really like to move that gets reinstated. We do an awful lot of traveling, and just feel that any other job I've had, you get paid for travel. So I would really like to understand why that was taken off and move to have it put back on. Thanks.
CEO?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So on the first question with regards to benefits, so the benefits, I believe what you're asking, Councillor Moore, is why the budget in 2020 is substantially different than the actuals in 2019? Is that what you're asking? So the actuals, so you may recall, some may or may not recall, in 2018, we came to council with council compensation. And so the idea is to try to make it fair and consistent across the board. So as it relates to training, as it relates to benefits, as it relates to, there was a discussion about OMERS and It was decided that OMERS would not be taken away from members of council, and so that's part of that, that number. But within that too is $21,000 for health and dental benefits. And so every member of council has an allotment up to $3,000 to have your own health and dental plan. Members of council, I believe there's only one or two that have actually taken that up. So hence in 2019's actuals, hence why it's so much lower than what we're proposing in 2020. So we still are trying to maintain the $3,000 for each member of council, regardless of whether they utilize it or not. That's kind of what council approved back in 2018, and so we're trying to keep that. To your question about travel, council, just to be clear, council members do get reimbursed for travel. The idea is that the reimbursement to come to, well, tonight is a special council meeting, so you should be putting that in. You do get reimbursed for special council meetings. But the idea to come to a regular council meeting, that's where the decision was made not to reimburse for a regular council meeting. And I'll be upfront with you. I think the idea is that nobody really gets paid to travel to work. But if you're asking to come for a special meeting that wasn't really a plan for, then the idea is we would reimburse you for it. Right? That was kind of the game plan. So.
Follow on?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. So I'd agree that coming to work, I wouldn't expect to get paid for on a regular meeting evening. What I'm really referring to are all the other events that we're expected to attend. That's what I'm referring to. Those I would appreciate being paid to travel to and from. Thanks.
CAO?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Moore, those you can. So you just have to submit the reimbursement form, and you should be reimbursed for that travel time.
Yep.
Yeah.
That is the policy. So if you want to go back and calculate that and submit an expense report, that's within the policy that's been
So
accepted by
the
council.
the only thing that I've been submitting for then are the special meetings. But if I have to go to the Santa Claus parade, something like that.
Yep.
Well, I'm going to do some paperwork. Thank you.
Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Also on that topic is our other committee meetings we go to, like RAC, Minnesing doing IWalk, Ant Mills, things like that. I was told also it's only for special meetings for like tonight, or if we have to call a special meeting.
So,
CAO Schmidt.
so for committee, so if you're on library, if you're on RAC, then no, because none of the other committee members get reimbursed for travel. That's the policy right now. Could change.
Follow on?
But they get the $40 per meeting to go.
Correct. Just relaying policy is what it is today, subject to change, obviously, so.
Councillor Cabral?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Just going back to benefits here, would it be fair to say that when council members were getting benefits through the township, that would not have shown up here, hence the lower number? Would have shown up somewhere else?
CAO?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Cabral, no, the benefits would be showing here. So previously, through the corporate provider, those monthly amounts in premium would actually be showing as an expense in the council line item.
As an expense or as a benefit?
Well, as an expense under benefits.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
Okay. Ready to move on? Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you, Mayor Allen, through to you, Deputy. Regarding council, town hall meetings, I'd like to know what the cost of that, where does that fall in, and how much is that? Is that, do we need to do a motion, or can you just come back to council? Like, I know there was one just done in Grenville. What's the cost to put this on? And I think it'd be interesting for all of council to know this.
CAO?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Let's pause for 1 second here. I believe we allot approximately $500 for the town halls, for each town hall. And it does fall under the council, council budget, under, sorry, bear with me for a sec. It's under the contractual service, special projects and events line. So it's included in that $4,000. So it's not $4,000 allotted to town halls, but I believe we've allotted $1,000 for the town halls.
I just find
do.
like to have all the staff there and the number of hours that are there, the cost involved to put these on. I think that's, while we're doing budget, this is a perfect time to ask, to see what, if you can bring that back, or do I need to do a motion, or whatever. I'm sure maybe there's other council members that would like to know, to shed some light on the cost of doing that.
So,
I think that's the whole purpose.
so just to confirm my
Like,
comment.
I'm sorry,
No, just to confirm. my-
500 seems awfully cheap.
Well, so just to confirm what that number represents, that's essentially for a lot of the production of postcards and the rental of space if needed to, and/or for refreshments and stuff like that. That does not include staff time.
That's what I'm after.
Staff time is essentially borne
You
within
and
our
all
own
the
departments.
staff, to have them there, to put this on, to facilitate. What's the cost of that? And that's what I would like to see. You could bring that back, or whatever process that we need to follow through. I'd like to see what that is, because I think that's something that we should know while we're doing budget and what the amount of money is, because I think it's quite a bit of money, and it's something we should be looking at and debating and discussing about as well, too.
Deputy Mayor Coughlin?
Thank you, Mayor Allen, and through you. A report was generated, I believe, a few years ago, with the costs associated for the town hall. And if memory serves correctly, council decided at that time that as there was a rotation in place, and we had yet to get to every of the 7 hamlets or communities, that we would continue with that. But once all those communities had been reached, that we decided not to continue with town hall meetings at that. That's what my recollect, but I believe that report's already generated, so if we can just resurface it.
Councillor Cabral?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. I wouldn't mind finding out. I knew that there were town halls going on. There's been, I guess, 3 so far this year, if I'm not mistaken, but at least 2.
No.
2, the one in Midhurst and
2,
the
I
one in
believe.
Town Hall. But I would be interested too in knowing what the soft dollar costs are as well. I was gonna ask that question with respect to the number of staff that are in attendance, and find out whether or not all of the staff that are in attendance are necessarily needed, maybe. That might be something to look at as well, so I'd be interested to know.
CEO, did you have a comment on that? or-
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, and again, great questions in that regards, and I think, for the town hall that we just had, did we need all the staff there? You never know what kind of questions you're gonna get from residents, right? And so that's part of the challenge, and my thoughts were is I'd rather have the team there to be able to answer the questions as opposed to, I'll get back to you kind of thing, right? I shouldn't say this because there may be questions coming up that I may have to get back to you on, but my preference is to try to deal with the question while the question's there, right? So again, it may be something that we can take a look at, and maybe even the structure of those town halls on a go-forward basis, maybe we change them so that, we don't have to have necessarily everybody, and we don't have everybody there, don't get me wrong, but most of the senior staff there. Again, maybe we look at a different structure where maybe it's only a few of us that have to attend, so.
Okay, we'll get further follow-up on that. Do you still want to comment on this, or move on? Yes, go ahead.
But my comment is back to the training. I thank you for your generosity. I just wanted council to be aware of what we're spending here so we can equate it with what staff get for training. My next question quickly would just be contractual services. Where do we pay for the integrity commissioner in here?
CAO?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Hannah, the Integrity Commissioner actually falls under the next tab, the General Administration, under our corporate legal fees, so it's not under council.
Councillor Cabral?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. I did have a question with respect to contractual services that we contract out. And some of the figures, they seem inordinately high, But I guess the offset would be that some of these, would they be contracted services that come about as a result of, say, a development going in where we're still paying them, but we're getting compensated back for them?
CEO?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Cabral. So let me take a different approach. So, you know, we may do a development charge study, or we may do a facility assessment study. So the cost, the gross expenditures goes under contractual services, but then we may have funds that come through a transfer from reserves and or reserve funds, which shows on a different portion of the cost center, if you will. So we have to, from an accounting side of things, we have to show what the gross expenditure is, and then we also have to show what the revenue is coming in. At the end of the day, the net is the same, but I can't show the revenue offsetting the gross expenditure under the same line. It's accounting speak.
Follow on?
I kind of understand that, but I'm just, maybe that's something that would be helpful here, because when I look at it, it looks like it's very high, yet the reality might be that it's only 25 or 30% of that actual figure, because when someone gets the permit, a lot of the caveats are they will pay for this, 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 and this, but I suspect they end up paying that. Do they pay that directly to their consultant or design engineers, or are they billed back by the township? So, you know, like, that's where I'm trying to figure out here is how that works out.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Cabral, so I fight this thing off. Essentially, when it comes to development, it is a flow-through. So we end up paying for the legal and or engineering side of things, but it doesn't flow through as an expense. Essentially what happens, we have it in, let's call it a suspense account. So essentially, we pay it and then we invoice directly back to the developer. And so it doesn't show up as an expense from the township side, so.
Okay, yes, Councillor Chapman?
Thank you, Mary Ellen. I have one more question. You explained the utilities portion of that, the heat, telephone, hydro. I don't understand it.
CEO?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Ma Chapman. So the utilities in council relates to telephone reimbursement for the mayor and deputy mayor.
Would the internet, the $50 a month for the internet be included in that?
CEO?
That falls under the technology and minor capital line for the internet.
Okay, before we move on, do you want to take a 5-minute bio break, or? Okay. Okay,
Same conversation. Find it.
we shall resume.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So moving
And
on
we're-
to.
We're going to go till 5:30 tonight, so.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So moving on to tab 4 of your budget binder. This area is referred to as the general administration area. As I mentioned earlier, it does include myself, the Human Resources Department, Finance, Information Technology, clerks, as well as noted on here, the bylaw enforcement will be moved into the clerk's department in 2020. So from a budget perspective, bylaw has been included in this area. So year over year, the impact is a $208,000 increase, or 1.57% increase. How this next slide here is to give council a breakdown of the major drivers or pressures as to what's causing that $208,000. So the first item is the annualized cost for new staff approved in 2019 was approximately $105,000. Cost of living adjustment and merit increases or step increases. So we have some staff that through our pay grid will start at step 1 and move their way through to step 5. So there's some of those funds that are in here. That equates to approximately $50,000. We have an increase in our minor capital and annual technology costs, so that's approximately about $45,000. We have an increase in our corporate legal fees of approximately $5,000, and then we have other miscellaneous items, too many to kind of report on, that are smaller dollars, approximately just under $3,000. So those items all add up to the $208,000 increase in general administration. Moving on to the program changes. So there are no program changes proposed in general administration in 2020. So nothing here. And then from a major initiatives perspective, there are a number of items that staff's proposing on implementing or moving forward with in 2020. The first one is the creation of the new strategic plan. Obviously, with the regional government review now over and that decision being made, we are looking at bringing forward and conducting a strategic plan exercise in 2020. We're looking at also an HR compensation and market review. This was geared for, I believe, 2019. However, staff are moving this forward into 2020 because essentially nothing has been done at this stage due to obviously some transitions. And so we are looking at moving that forward in 2020. We're looking at updating and implementing new corporate training and HR policies. Looking at project management of new software initiatives. So our IT area is going to be very busy in 2020 with a number of different initiatives. So we have a CityView implementation, which relates to our building services. We have a citywide implementation, which relates to our asset management and work order management system. We have a Questica implementation, which is budget related, which is almost done, but just have to put the finishing touches on that. In addition to that, we're looking at finalizing a negotiated funding and finance agreement with the Midhurst Secondary Plan landowners. So this is something that's been on the docket for a number of years, but obviously with the announcement last week, this is something that we need to circle back on and finalize and bring something forward to council. In addition to that, we're looking at trying to resolve the outstanding development charge appeals, updating our procurement policy and bylaw. Continuing to explore online opportunities for animal tag purchases and renewals, and also the implementation of some new bylaw software. And I will turn to either the clerk and or our IT coordinator if they have any other comments or anything else that they would like to comment on major initiatives, by all means.
Clerk Chaparral?
Thank you. So some major initiatives for the Clerk's Department for 2020. There are a few bylaws that will be reviewed, such as the business licensing bylaw and the sign bylaw. There is the drafting and proposal of a fence bylaw. Clerks are looking at doing a revitalization to the Civic web portal, which is our meeting management software. It doesn't have dollar figures attached, but it is quite a large project to update what council sees right now for online meetings. and as well as a board review. So the BIA, the Library and Sports Heritage, just the same as we did a committee review, we would like to review the boards just to ensure that processes are happening in accordance with legislation, that any updates or whatnot could happen to those three boards.
Michael, do you have anything to add? You got all dressed up for us, so we figured you'd be
I was trying to be
wanting to
prepared.
elucidate.
Yeah, nothing major. A lot of the impacts are just coming from the new software that's kicked off at this point. The one big item I'm looking for is just a little bit of additional budget for the servers. I know I've been asking for it the last couple of years, really. I've been sort of deferring it. Fact of the matter is, I just haven't had full time and just to really get into it. But I did get some quotes this year, and I sort of under budgeted at that point. So just asking for a bit more money there. But other than that, it's all new sort of software initiatives that I'm hoping to push for 2020, and yeah.
Thank you. Questions? Councillor Cabral?
Thank you very much, Mayor Allen, and I thanks very much for coming up, Michael. I appreciate it because this question is going to be directed towards you.
Okay.
Actually, I was just curious to know if there's any work being done to migrate any more documents to the website. That's one. And the second question was, because I get a lot of people now, because we got the new website, a lot of the hits in the Google searches are not coming up with the right information. But I'm also, some people are saying they can't go back and get certain information even that normally would have been there, but I just don't think it's in a PDF form. So that was one question. The second one is when a visitor attends the website, the search feature is not very robust as far as being able to narrow down what you're looking for. Is there any feature that might be able to be added to the website for the general public that would assist them with that? These are a couple of questions that I got that I'd really appreciate answers to.
Sure.
If you feel it'd be better to discuss those offline, to answer those, then that'd be fine. Or if they're quick answers, then.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Cabral. So one of the things, again, Michael, if you want to answer those questions, but I think one of the things that we also are doing is the provider e-solutions that essentially help deploy the website. We do have update meetings still with them. So again, these are things that we could take back and have those discussions with them, unless Michael has a different response, but.
Right.
So.
Well, just quickly with the first question, we made a number of changes with going to the new website. We took a lot of those forms and things like that we previously had, deemed that they weren't hit very often, so we sort of kept the new website concise. It made it a lot easier to transition to, just putting what needed to be on there rather than just putting everything on there that we used to have. So if there's something missing, certainly let me know. And as for the search, it actually uses a search provider called Cluedo. There are some additional features there. I'm not sure if there's too much of an advanced search there, but I can certainly look into that and try to meet the needs of the residents that are complaining about it.
Okay. Councillor Hanna?
Thank you. Through the chair to you, sir. CEO Schmidt. The contractual services on the budget, it's $612,188, a lot of money. Could you just tell me quickly or briefly what's in that $600,000, please?
CEO?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Councillor Hanna. There's actually a number of things in there, but the bigger pieces, I guess, is the insurance. So the insurance for the corporation, more the general liability insurance that we don't allocate out to the various departments, is approximately $250,000. There's audit fees for our annual audit, which is approximately $33,000. The DC, update to our DC is approximately $35,000. Again, some of these are offset with reserves and reserve funds. So to Councillor Cabral's question earlier, we have $10,000 in there for the strategic plan. We have legal fees, corporate legal fees, so these don't include any legal fees that may pertain to a development. Those would go through planning. Essentially, there's $35,000 there. We have advertising, so corporate advertising, in the amount of approximately $40,000. We have Springwater policing charge. So as I mentioned before, we do charge residential properties and managed forest properties a policing charge, but also in addition to that, we have to charge ourselves for every property that we own the policing charge. So that equates to approximately $65,000. In addition to that, we have the contract with K9 for our animals. So that's included in that number as well. And again, there's some smaller items in there as well. Fence viewers and livestock evaluators that we come in and we have to reimburse them for. So that's all included in that number. So.
Follow on?
Thank you. I guess I was looking to see what the Integrity Commissioner is costing us, and I know you don't have the bill on that. I don't believe you do anyway.
CAO?
So thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Councillor Hannah. So included in the legal fees, we do have a portion. We do have a portion for the Integrity Commissioner. So that's from a budget perspective. I believe we have about $10,000 in there. However, from an actual perspective, I don't know what those numbers are, what we've incurred to date. I'm not sure that we've received all invoicing as of yet. So that is something that if council wishes, we could report back on separately. We can provide it at a subsequent meeting and or through an email response.
Speaking for myself, I benefit from that. Thank you.
Councillor Cabral?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Through the
Your mic's not on.
this thing keeps turning off. I know that last budget there was some significant money spent on software, and I know that that's going to be off the table, a lot of it this year because it was spent in 2019. What I would like to know is there a place in the budget where all the licensing fees might be found? Where would give us a sense of what kind of licensing fees are going to be ongoing and where they might be located?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Councillor Cabral. So they are included in IT. With that said, there are some annual license fees that we do charge back to certain departments to the extent that their user fee recovered. So, but we do have annual licenses within the general administration, which IT is part of the general administration. I don't have the exact number in front of me, so again, that is something that we could report back to the council on as to what those annual technology fees are specifically.
Yep, that would be good for me, only because I think initially included the first year in a lot of the licensing packages that I think we bought, but we really didn't get a sense of what the annualization
Correct.
for all of them would be. Thank you.
Correct.
Okay, Councillor Ritchie?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Through to Jeff. New hires. Can you elaborate on that? Go back to your next slide there. You had new hires. 100 and some thousand.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Ritchie. So the annualized cost for new staff, I assume, is what you're requesting. So you may recall that back in May of 2019, previous CAO came to council, and again, wasn't privy to the conversation, so please correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding is that there was two positions that the previous administration came to council on for approval, one of them being an IT position, and the other position being a corporate and strategic coordinator. So those are the two positions. So the IT position is in the process of being filled. The other position, we're in the process of revamping that position, and we are looking to hire somebody for that position, yes.
Mayor Allen, the reason why I'm asking this question is it seems to be a lot of new hires I see in this budget this year, and whether it be administration, whether it be public works, parks and rec, the whole thing, and you people come to us, and of course we sit here and we debate this, and and pass it, or we don't pass it. I'd like to get a third opinion. So I'd like to table a motion now, or tell me when I can.
Okay, what was the motion be?
Well, Mayor Allen, that all new hirings in this year's budget for 2020 be put on hold until CO Schmidt has brought back to council a cost of having an efficiency audit done on Springwater Township to help this council decide which direction council should take with all new hirings, and report back to council as soon as possible. If I look at the new hirings that's being done, there was new hirings last year, this year, you'll be back here again next year with the implementation of some of these new projects coming on stream, and I think you know what I'm talking about. You can be sure there's going to be more hires. And I often wonder, where are we going with this? Not that I doubt your words. I'd like to get a third opinion. Maybe we need more staff. Maybe we need less staff. What's the cost to do this? And I think that would use us as a guide to help us achieve where we should go in running a good, efficient township. And I ask for the support of council on that too. Thank you.
CAO Schmidt?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you to Councillor Ritchie. So, again, great questions and great comments. One thing that actually staff will be bringing forward on the December 4th agenda, the province, through the regional government review, announced that there was an additional monies in the range of $125 million. So there is an application intake right now whereby municipalities can seek funds from that $125 million to perform an efficiency study, or an efficiency audit, if you will, or a service delivery review. So that is something that we will be bringing forward to council for your consideration at the December 4th meeting. Again, seeking funding from the province to allow us to proceed in conducting such a review. So we don't have to incur additional dollars from our side. Again, so to that point, you know, there could be a recommendation, or again, I'm not a counselor, so I can't offer a friendly. I don't know. It must be the last name. Anyways, you know, that is something that maybe a motion is that that no staff or new staff is considered until that's done, or are not hired. That's up to council to make that decision. So.
Mayor Allen.
Follow on?
Well, you know what, I'm in my 9th year here, and I've watched us grow. I've watched us bring new staff on. And I think this is a perfect time right now with some of the announcements that's being made. And again, every year there's new hires, and you know, after a while you start asking yourself, do we need more? Do we need less? Why don't you have an opinion and you have an opinion, we all have an opinion. I like to get a third opinion of somebody that's doing this all the time to come in and take a look at our organization and report back to us and say, this is where you should be going. You should have more staff here. You should have more staff there. And we can use that as a guideline. And I think it'd be good for all the staff to take a look at this, especially starting with the cost. Regardless of the cost, I still think we need to move forward with this. I ask council to support this, please.
Okay, we need a seconder on this, please. Councillor Moore. Further discussion on this? Do you want it read again? Moved by Councillor Ritchie, seconded by Councillor Moore, that all new hirings in the 2020 budget be put on hold until the CAO has brought back to council a cost of having an efficiency audit done on Springwater to help this council decide which direction council should take with all new hirings, and report back to council as soon as possible. So, okay. Comment? Deputy Mayor Coghlan.
Thank you, Mayor Allen, and through you to Councillor Ritchie. Is that suggesting that the money should not be set aside in the 2020 budget, or that the money will be set aside but the positions will not be filled until we have the audit or the efficiencies audit reviewed?
Maybe that's a question for our director, our CAO. If the money's set aside, that's fine. Like, I mean, if we're in a crunch, we need to hire, fine, but I think we need to get this process started. It does take a matter of time. I think when I sat on the NVCA, and I mentioned it to Byron there the other night, we were about a year in the process. The interview people that go through, it's a lengthy process. Very lengthy, but very detailed. It helped them very, very much. And I think it would help us too as well, because there's a lot of stuff going to be happening here. So to answer the deputy mayor's question, set the money aside, but let's spend some money and get this, let's get it right. Thank you.
CAO?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Councillor Ritchie and members of council. Just maybe to try to clarify in my head as to where we're going here. So, you know, we have some positions, fire chief and the 2 positions that I mentioned, and we may have others as we move through. And we just announced today our new director of recreation. So my concern would be is would this motion mean that we're not replacing those positions until this is done? And, or does this just strictly apply to the positions that are being requested in the 2020 budget? If they're just for the 2020 budget, council, we really haven't had the discussion about those program changes at this stage. So I would maybe ask that we have that conversation. If that's still the position of yourself, then by all means, we're in council's hands in that regards. But I just want to be clear about, we
Yeah.
have
No,
some
I-
positions that we haven't
Mayor Allen.
replaced that I need some direction on it.
Yeah,
and
absolutely. I
Can I
think
replace
that's
those?
worth saying, if I could just respond to that.
Yes,
I think if that was to maybe incorporate essential positions like Director of Public Parks and Rec, Fire Chief, those positions have to be filled. Those are essential, everyday positions, and we need to fill them and move forward with that to advance the business of the township and the running of the township every day. But all these new hires and all that, and moving forward, that's where I'd like to see that efficiency audit, as to how you want to amend that.
So
The essential positions need to be filled, yes.
So given the report that's coming forward next council meeting and the timing of, if that went through, then the timing of that efficiency audit would be what?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, based on the parameters of that intake, my understanding is that you have to apply by December 6th, which is what we're hoping to do, and obviously why we're coming December 4th to get a council resolution to either support applying or not. So assuming that we walk the path of approval, we'll be submitting by December 6th. My understanding is that the province will be making a decision by January, February, and then quickly we'll have to go out and hire somebody. And my understanding is that a draft report has to be completed by June of 2020. And then by the end of June, the final report has to be posted on the township's website. So it's a pretty quick turnaround. But again, it is something that we're looking at trying to pursue, subject to council's approval.
So this efficiency audit, if it's approved and we get funded, would cover what Councillor Ritchie's talking about, but it's just the time frame. So we have extra positions, several of them, that have been asked for in this budget process, and we have declined a couple of them so far with respect to the library. What I would suggest is that we continue with the different departments, hear what the asks are, make a determination at the table with respect to those specific asks, and then vote for this efficiency audit on the 4th, and go ahead with that, which will produce the results that we want as council in the way of efficiencies.
That'll work.
So given that, Councillor Ritchie, would you consider withdrawing the motion, understanding that that's the basis that we're moving?
Mayor Allen, that'll work. I'm glad we're giving direction there, but I think this is the time to hit this on the head on the nail on the head. We're doing budget. We wait, but at least it's on the floor. We're talking about it, but we can address that, and I think that's very good for council. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Cabral?
Thank you very much, Mayor Allen, through to CAO Schmidt. Could you elaborate? I understand what Councillor Ritchie's getting at. I see it more as an opportunity to examine the entire organization from the administration to the bottom down, how we structure our resources, what services we provide, what types of things we have in place that are maybe we're putting too much into, and again, on the other side of the coin, where are we limiting ourselves and should be putting more resources? So we could really build this pretty much as big as we wanted to, and I just want to get a sense from you, CAO Schmidt, exactly what you envision the proposal would entail, because it sounds to me that the provincial government is looking for exactly this type of project.
CAO?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you to Councillor Cabral. So those are exactly the things that we're trying to take a look at. To be quite honest with you, when this proposal came out, my thoughts were at first is, okay, maybe we need to look at one or two specific areas within the municipality. But then I quickly said, well, hang on, I don't want to pigeonhole one department over another. I think it's an opportune time, myself coming on new in the position, why don't we take a look at everything to the extent we can, but understanding at the same time we got to scope this because it's a pretty tight timeline to get some of the stuff done. With that said too, obviously with some of the decisions that have been made at the provincial level recently, we need a better understanding too to help us understand what are we going to look like in the near future, what should we be looking like, what should we be considering, you know, and we need to have some discussions with the development community as well to say, hey, listen, you know what, we may need some additional staff, and by the way, this is going to directly benefit you, so we need some funding to help us through this. So those are the types of things that I am looking at, you know, and to your point too, delivery of different services to the extent we can do it through this intake, great, but we may have to wait. My understanding is there's 3 intakes that are planned. Whether or not that fully comes to fruition, I don't know, but my understanding is that there's 3 intakes, so hopefully we'll be successful and we can move forward with this. I will, obviously always have to caution things. The one comment that was made to us from the provincial government is, and we are trying to address it through this budget process, is one of the things they're going to ask, if they haven't already, they haven't asked me, but is how did you use the funds that we provided you earlier in 2019? So the $676,000 that is in the staff report for the budget, they're going to want to know how we utilize those funds. So again, I don't want to put a damper on things, but I also have to caution you in the sense of if we don't have some direction and or some consideration of how those funds are going to be spent, we may not be in a position to be successful with this intake. So I'm not trying to paint you into a corner. I'm just saying those are some comments that we received from the provincial level. So,
But all of that, which will be reviewed in the report on December 4th, right?
Correct.
Yes, okay. All right, Councillor Hanna?
Thank you. I support the motion to continue on the way we are and see if there's going to be any new hires. But I have to make a comment with regard to these audits, and I've reviewed them in the past. And when they send out, not saying negative about employees, but when they send out a questionnaire to people that are being audited and say, how busy are you? Are you overworked? Do you need more help? I've never had one where anybody said that they're not that busy and they don't need any more help. So they could be misleading is what I'm trying to say.
CEO?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess the other thing, again, it might be considered is that, and I know we did this on a long-range financial plan, is actually coming back to council with the scope of the RFP and getting council's approval of that, understanding the timeline is going to be very tight. But again, that is an option where we could come back, here's what we plan to do. Council, are you in agreement with this? And then submit, assuming we're successful in getting the funding. So that is an option that we could explore as well, so that, again, council has a say in, no, you guys are crazy, that's not what we want, or, yeah, we agree, that's exactly what we want to see, right? So, again, something for further consideration.
I think that's a good idea. Okay, so given the time, I don't think we should move to the next section. We just get started, and we agreed we're going to recess in 5 minutes, so we're 5 minutes earlier. So we'll recess to be resumed next Monday. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.